Bridging the Gaps in Accessible Innovation, a conversation about two recent project proposals from Germany.
Hi all. This is a conversation between Beatriz González Mellídez and Adrian Hermann about accessibility, innovation, and transdisciplinary research. We will present and discuss two funding proposals that we are involved in and that have recently been submitted to the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research. Hi Bea, can you tell the listeners a bit about who you are?
Hi, my name is Beatriz González Mellídez, and I go by Bea for those who can pronounce it, and B, just like the letter B, in English-speaking context to make communication easier. I am 41 years old, I wear glasses and have ADHD. And sometimes ADHD has me. Somehow, accessibility was always part of my life and work. I don't like to exclude people. I started learning LSE, Spanish Sign Language, for fun as a teenager. I taught myself HTML, and while I was leading the Design Innovation Department in Línea Directa back in 2008, I did a postgraduate study on accessibility and usability of web contents to keep my knowledge fresh. I came to Germany 15 years ago to learn German in a sabbatical, and when I was ready to leave, 2 cities and 2 years later, I met Adrian in Munich. Now I am based in Cologne and we have 2 kids. In 2022, Neil Milliken made me an offer good enough to stop my planned long-term maternity leave, and I started my first role in full-time accessibility as head of accessibility and digital inclusion for Central Europe at Atos. I lead the German UPA, Professional Association of UX and Usability Professionals, Accessibility Working Group, since 2020. And I am also actively contributing to the IAAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So Adrian, what about you? Who are you and what has sparked your interest in accessibility?
Hi, my name is Adrian Hermann. I am a professor at the University of Bonn. I am 42 years old and I am German. I have a PhD from the University of Basel in Switzerland. I'm a cultural studies scholar, and I have been working somewhere between cultural history, religious studies, game studies, and media studies in the last few years. So my interest in accessibility was actually sparked by my conversations with Bea and by the realization that thinking about accessibility is a great way to reflect upon the different ways in which humans, technology, and the world are interfacing. In particular, I think accessibility and disability to me seem to be an under-theorized aspect of an intersectional perspective. So a perspective that goes beyond race, class, and gender to also include disability and questions of access more generally.
Thank you. The first project we want to talk about is a funding proposal in the DATIpilot funding scheme.
Yes, so DATIpilot is a funding scheme that is run by the German Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the Bundesministerium für Bildung und Forschung, abbreviated BMBF. It is part of the preparation for establishing the DATI, the German Agency for Transfer and Innovation, or Deutsche Agentur für Transfer und Innovation. In order to do so, the ministry has created the DATIpilot funding scheme. There are 2 modules, the smaller innovation sprints and then the larger innovation communities. These promote exchange and strategic cooperation in regional innovation systems. So all in all, 10 communities will be funded with 5 million euros each over 4 years. Together with a sizable number of collaboration partners, and especially Professor Lasse Scherfig at the TH Köln, or University of Applied Sciences in Cologne, who submitted a proposal, we have written a project proposal for an accessibility innovation community. The project title is Accessible River, the Bonn-Cologne-Düsseldorf area along the Rhine as an accessible future region for social and technological innovations. What is your motivation and interest in this funding scheme on innovation and transfer, Bea?
My main motivation is to lead collaboration that bridges the gaps in innovation. I want to make accessibility a key part of all sorts of social and technological innovations. My background is in user experience and in front-end development. I am a problem solver, a maker, and my goal is not to have to work in accessibility anymore, because accessibility finally has become a natural part of every innovation process. There is a big push for innovation in public and private sector, but not many entities talk about accessible or inclusive innovation. Public sector initiatives like this DATIpilot do not explicitly mention accessibility requirements. And if we exclude people with disabilities and the elderly from the innovation processes, on the one hand, we're missing an important lived experience and insights of this needs not so small group of the population. And on the other hand, we're missing future users and customers and creating problems, as accessibility does not happen by accident. Disability inclusion is a great driver for innovation. People with disabilities deal with constraints every day and need to find creative workarounds to meet their goals. So it's in everyone's interest to push for accessible innovation.
So what about new legislations and rules?
So that is a great question. Yes, public sector in Europe has an obligation to comply with accessibility for web and apps, and in Germany, also with the workplace and with documentation. And that is since 2021. Legislation like the European Accessibility Act and its German implementation, the BFSG, the Barrierefreiheitsstärkungsgesetz, affect also private sector, which means inaccessible innovation has expiry date of June 28, 2025, and this will imply high remediation costs. Accessibility, as any other missing functional requirement, needs to be built in and thought from the beginning. Adding accessibility after the fact is not only costly, but is also not as enjoyable. What about your motivation to participate in the DATIpilot Innovation Community proposal, Adrian?
So for me, I think accessibility and questions of access have opened up exciting new research possibilities. So DATIpilot in particular, through the close collaboration with practice partners, will be a new challenge for me to contribute to practical problem solving in the realms of accessibility. And I really hope that my mostly theoretical and often humanities-centered perspective will be of use for the other partners. In our DATIpilot project, we approach the relationship between accessibility and innovation from two sides. On the one hand, we want to stress that all innovation should be as inclusive and accessible as possible, right from the beginning. In this sense, our innovation community, if we get the chance to build it, can hopefully influence all of the other DATIpilot communities as well, to include accessibility into their approach to innovation. On the other hand, we want to make visible accessibility itself as an important but often neglected area of innovation. Inclusive innovation processes take into account various forms of barriers and address people with disabilities as experts in their own right. They center their inventive and experimental overcoming of barriers in the workplace and in everyday life. This makes them important drivers of innovation that have not received enough attention to date. So we see a big chance to build an innovation community around this conviction. What are some of the things planned for the innovation community if it receives funding, Bea?
One of the community projects we submitted is led by Atos and supported by the universities of Bonn and Cologne. Adrian and I, the background I'm going to give you, spent a Saturday in a participative session at the Future Lab of our city, Cologne. Unbox Cologne was an idea challenge, with Dirk Blauho, the Unbox team, and a group of passionate citizens that wanted to make the city better. But there was no requirement and there was no visibility for accessibility in this Future Lab. So at the end, work, life, sleep, balance as it is, I ended up not submitting the application because of work, ADHD, and life. I was already working with some Atos colleagues in academic collaborations and looking for innovation funding where we could collaborate as partners. So when Adrian mentioned this call for proposals, it sounded like a great opportunity to reuse and continue the work we planned for Unbox Cologne on an inclusive innovation corner. As a pilot project for the innovation community, we are therefore developing a so-called I3 lab, Inclusive Innovation Incubation Labs. These labs continue to making disability and human diversity visible both at fixed location at companies and in public institutions. And in the project, we're going to develop 2 I3 labs that will be set up as prototypes. One will be at Atos near Cologne, and hopefully the future lab of the city of Cologne will have the second one. In addition, the I3 concept will also be developed as a prototype in a mobile version, in a suitcase that anyone can carry around to test at home. It will be a compact I3 mobile lab.
So what will people be able to do and learn at the lab?
The idea of the project is to create a playful system for accessibility and for exploring assistive technology settings of the devices. We will be using NFC chips and 3D printed figures to activate the different user profiles, because sometimes configuring accessibility settings on the operating system can be a bit challenging with a lot of screens to go through and organize and configure. We will have various devices and accessories that will be available for testing in the lab, including 3D printed gadgets. We will have posters and guidelines providing overview information. They will help the users set up their profiles and to help them to familiarize themselves with the technologies. Innovators can learn what needs to be considered when supporting different users and learn as they go. In this way, the i3 Labs help not only innovators in the region, but also citizens and employees to learn about their neighbors, their families, and everyone in the community who has a disability. They can learn more about digital technologies and even test their own needs for assistive devices, maybe being more productive at work and in their daily lives, making use of all the power of the technology they have in their pockets. Together with municipal, educational, and research institutions, they demonstrate that accessibility is a central part of any future innovation. The second project we want to talk about is a proposal to establish a Käte Hamburger Kolleg in the area of accessibility. Käte Hamburger International Centres are one of the most prestigious funding schemes in the humanities in Germany. They are also funded by the BMBF, the same federal ministry as in the case of the DATIpilot. They offer humanities scholars and social scientists the opportunity to conduct research on topics of their own choosing, together with outstanding national and international researchers. To this end, the international centers invite researchers from all over the world, the so-called fellows, for a period of up to 1 year to Germany to do research together on the topic of the center. Can you tell us more about this project, Adrian? What is it about and what is the goal?
So if funded, the proposal we submitted in January, so the University of Bonn and University of Cologne, would lead to the establishment of a Käte Hamburger International Centre, basically a long-term think tank for up to 12 years on accessibility. Or rather, as is the project's name, a center for research into accessible worlds, technologies and cultures of access. So a name that fits very well with this conference on Accessible Canada and Accessible World. Accessibility can be understood as a human right, but it's also a key issue for future design of global societies. But it has not yet been established as a prominent and interdisciplinary topic of research in the humanities or in general in transdisciplinary research as a fundamental concept. And all of this despite the important and successful work that has been done in the field of disability studies over the last 40 years. So I think this holds a great potential for socially engaged humanities and social scientists to make a decisive contribution to finding transdisciplinary solutions to global great challenges.
Indeed. So what potential does the idea of accessibility hold for you as an academic and as a researcher?
So I think to establish accessibility, or in the context of German academic discussions, Zugänglichkeit, as a fundamental concept in this way, would be a step towards an accessibility turn, and it could also serve as the basis of a broad research program. Such a program would investigate technologies and cultures of access as human-technology world relations and examine them from a global and comparative perspective. It would build on the contributions of activists in the international disability movement and researchers in disability studies. Drawing on the work currently being done in critical access studies, accessibility is therefore not only seen as a solution-oriented inclusion practice, but also as a novel, transdisciplinary instrument of reflection and thinking about the humans and humanity's place in the world. In further developing such a transdisciplinary understanding of accessibility, which would be built on a comprehensive philosophical and anthropological foundation, I think then media studies, cultural studies, regional studies, and others could work together, and together with existing initiative and research in participation, inclusion, and rehabilitation research. But I think we could also extend this to political science, economics and law, to computer science, medicine, health and engineering sciences, and, well, also design theory and practice.
because you need everyone to build an inclusive society. Do you have often talked to me about the idea of an accessible turn in research? What would that turn look like?
So, accessibility as a theoretical concept for transdisciplinary research, I think, points to the idea of what could be called an accessibility turn. In the sense of such a turn, accessibility would not only be seen as an exciting topic of research for transdisciplinary research, but accessibility would itself act as a fundamental tool and medium of knowledge and knowledge production. So, building on work in the philosophy of disability, we can understand human life fundamentally from the perspective of access. And human life also takes place within the horizon of a normative but never fully realizable goal of creating accessible worlds. The international debate on access, on the other hand, could be enriched by contributions from German media philosophy, which have not yet been widely incorporated into such English language debates. I think that recent work in media philosophy on accessibility or Zugänglichkeit and access regimes, Zugänglichkeitsregime, is particularly promising. For example, drawing on the media philosopher Andreas Beinsteiner, we could consider accessibility a fundamental anthropological category. This allows us to see the human relationship to the world as a question of access, linked to the historical variability of accessibility regimes. In this sense, as philosopher Joel Reynolds puts it, accessibility can be understood as he says, the defining feature of what it means to be embodied as we are.
And what sort of research questions would the Käte Hamburger Center focus on?
So I think based on what I said so far, a number of fundamental research questions with a high potential for transdisciplinary inquiry would come into view. First, this would be the interrelations between bodies and worlds, or in the words of designer Sarah Hendren, where and how do bodies meet the built world? Secondly, I think a new understanding of human abilities as avenues of access, again in the words of philosopher Joel Reynolds, would also lead to new and interesting research questions. And with reference to a historical anthropology of technology, this would thirdly result in a general interest in human-technology world relations, understood as dynamic processes of interfacing.
Is this project focused only on academic researchers?
Well, I think the center would mainly invite people working at academic institutions as fellows, but we would hope to also be able to work with practitioners in the field of accessibility, as well as with designers of assistive technologies and with artists working with the concept of the aesthetics of access.
Well, I would also hope that we get more journalists involved in these topics, and let's hope that one or both of these projects receive the funding that we have asked for, and that we can further develop the ideas we talked about here today. We just lack.
Yes, that would be really exciting. Thanks for listening.